Today is really special for me personally because I can remember when Jenna was an intern years ago, too many years ago, right, that we want to remember, when I was first associated with the Locke Foundation and Jenna was an intern. And now Jenna happens to be Dr. Robinson. She also happens to be the new president of the Pope Center for Higher Education Policy. So it is just tremendous to see the development of a new leader in our community, and we have been fortunate enough to watch her growth and development here at the Locke Foundation and at the Pope Center. So a delight. As I said, we've known Jenna Robinson, or Jenna Ashley as she was known, for a very long time. She joined the Pope Center in 2007. She was the campus outreach coordinator there. She later became the center's director of outreach. Previously, the E.A. Morris Fellowship Assistant right here at the John Locke Foundation, where she had worked since 2001, where I first met her. She graduated from NC State in 2003 with a major in political science and French. She studied at many, many different places, received her master's degree in political science from UNC Chapel Hill, and her PhD in political science with a concentration in American politics and a minor in methods, also from Chapel Hill in 2012. You all probably know that with the recent retirement of Jane Shaw from the Pope Center, they promoted from within. And we are delighted to tell you that Jenna Ashley Robinson, Dr. Robinson, is the new president of the Pope Center. Today she's joining us to talk about what she calls counterculture, how the ivory tower is eroding American values. With that, Dr. Robinson.
Can you hear me, Mitch? Okay. Well, thank you, Donna, for making me blush. Thank you all for being here on a Friday, and thanks to the Locke Foundation and Corey for having me. I think this is my 4th time speaking at Shaftesbury, so echoing Donna's sentiment that I've been hanging around this building for a long time. And Donna gave my title today as Counterculture, how the ivory tower is eroding American values. And when I started putting my talk together, which I actually gave for the first time to the UNC College Republicans about 2 weeks ago, I realized that I needed to modify the title because I had too many examples and I actually ran over my time limit when I was talking to the College Republicans. So I had to cut it down to just 10 ways that the ivory tower is eroding American values. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, the 10 ways that I thought were worth mentioning in my limited amount of time of how the ivory tower is eroding American values. And I want to start out with a line from Dave Barry, and that is, I am not making this up. I'm going to give you a lot of examples from higher education all over the country, some of the crazy things that are happening, and rest assured I'm not making it up. I'm not creative in that particular kind of way, and you can't make it up. Some of it defies logic and even defies most of our creativity. So I'll start by telling a story of a couple of things that happened just last month. The first is an incident you may have read about, and that is at UC Irvine. 6 student government members voted to ban the American flag from some areas of campus. Thankfully, the ban was eventually overturned, but in the interim, thousands of professors and students signed a petition supporting the banning of the American flag at UC Irvine. And then just last week, I'm sure you heard this one as well, at the University of Michigan, administrators decided not to show the film American Sniper because the film would make students on campus feel unsafe. Again, cooler heads eventually prevailed. They switched course and decided they would, in fact, show the film, after the football coach weighed in and it had gotten press all over the country. So the good news is, in both of those cases, that between the sunlight that was provided by organizations and watchdogs across the country and the petitions that went on, eventually the right decision was made. But all too often that doesn't happen. Too many professors and administrators and students just go to school, keep their heads down, do their work, and ignore the culture on campus that has become really toxic. So the loudest voices that you hear on campus are, the radicals, the Marxists, the people who want every corner of campus to be a safe place, and they're allowed to run the show. And the other bad news is that UC Irvine and the University of Michigan, those are not isolated incidents. Things like this happen all the time. So before I get into my 10 ways, I want to start by saying, what higher education is really for, the purpose of liberal learning. And I'm going to quote from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which describes it this way. They see, ideally, a liberal education produces persons who are open-minded and free from provincialism, dogma, preconception, and ideology, conscious of their opinions, judgments, reflective of their actions, aware of their place in the social and natural worlds. They continue, liberally educated people are skeptical of their own traditions. They're trained to think for themselves rather than conform to higher authorities. And that's the Enlightenment vision of higher education. And I'm a big fan of the Enlightenment. I'm a huge fan of using reason and learning how to use that reason to look at our premises, to weigh evidence, to measure what's really going on. And I think the best of a liberal education does that. But there are problems in the way that this has been applied. First, too many students are really not taught to think for themselves. And second, the radical professors who are supposed to be teaching them to do that are simply replacing one kind of authority with another. So they assume that that students come into college having been raised with the traditional American Western background, and that this needs to be torn down. So in other words, they spend their time, tearing down American values in the name of creating open-minded individuals. And of course, that's not actually what they're doing. And I want to be clear that I'm not talking just about conservative values. I'm talking about American values. So I'm not going to talk about gay marriage or abortion or traditional sexual morality. I'm going to talk about something a lot more broad. And of course, I think you all already know the attitudes about abortion, sexual morality, and traditional marriage on campus. That's not something I have to spend 30 minutes talking about. So I'll talk about the broad American culture, the respect for knowledge and wisdom, for our civil liberties, for open inquiry. So with that, I'm going to get into the 10 ways that higher education, or the ivory tower, is eroding American values. And the first way that they're doing that is something I've spent a lot of time on, and that's by replacing a broad general education, the original liberal learning, with postmodernism and relativism. So general education, if you haven't paid attention, it has become a joke on our campuses. Most universities offer a smorgasbord of courses instead of a real foundation to liberal learning. A recent study by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni of 1,100 colleges and universities showed that just 18% required students to take a course in American history or government. Only 38% required literature of any kind. Only 60% require a math class, and only 3% require economics. And this is staggering. These are 1,100 of the most well-regarded universities in the country. And instead of having a general education curriculum, they basically throw students out and say, well, you take whatever you want, as long as some of it has to do with diversity. I mean, that really is the new general education curriculum. A few examples of what students can take right here at UNC Chapel Hill. They can take, to fulfill a general education requirement, love, sex, and marriage in Soviet culture, French New Wave cinema, recreation and leisure in society, the geisha in history, fiction, and fantasy. And not to leave NC State out, I do pick on my own alma mater as well. You can take Eating Through American History, An Introduction to Honeybee and Beekeeping, and Time Travel. We looked it up. This is not the literature of time travel. This is actually a class about time travel. So why is it that this happens, and why is it this matters? And there, I think I have two explanations for why this happens. One is because when you have a relativistic viewpoint, all knowledge is seen as equally useful. So many professors' attitudes, well, who am I to say that American history is more important than the history of a revolution in a tiny country halfway around the world? It's not my position to say. They're just professors with PhDs and years of experience. What do they know? Or when they are willing to make a stand about what is important, the ones who are willing to make that stand are the ones who say, what's really important is the race, class, and gender narrative. Don't worry about the math classes. Don't worry about logic or calculus or statistics. What you really want to take is race, class, and gender. That's essential. The second way that the ivory tower is eroding American values is by lowering academic standards to the point that they're meaningless, which is really, it's an attack on hard work, it's an attack on meritocracy, it's an attack on knowledge and wisdom that are fundamental to keeping a republic strong. And for a very long time, a college degree was meaningful. It signified, mastery of the collected knowledge and wisdom of generations. But that's just not the case anymore at too many schools. At several schools in the UNC system, 3 of them now, they're running a pilot project to allow the SAT score, the minimum SAT score to get in, to be 750 combined in math and writing. And I think at a more prestigious example is at UNC Chapel Hill. The athletics scandal taught us that not enough value is placed on actually learning something in class. There were too many people willing to turn a blind eye to what was going on in order to prop up the basketball team or the football team. And the fact that they were willing to sacrifice learning on the altar of athletics, I think is very telling. The third way that the ivory tower is eroding American values is by attacking religious liberty on campus. And this has been an effort that's been going on for years. In the 1980s, universities attempted to keep religious groups from even using empty classrooms. That was challenged in the Supreme Court, and no longer is that a tactic. So in the 1990s, universities tried to keep religious groups from sharing in student funds. That, again, went to the Supreme Court. Universities were told, no, you can't do that either. So now, just in 2010, the Supreme Court made a decision that I think most of you probably will not be a fan of. They decided that a private Christian club on a public university campus did not have the absolute right to choose its own leadership. They had to have an all-comers policy. They could not demand that the leaders of their Christian club be, in fact, Christians. Similarly, the leaders of a Republican club cannot demand that their leaders actually be Republicans. And, on the other side of the aisle, the same would be true. If you ran a pro-Palestine club, it could conceivably be taken over by anti-Palestine people because you have to have that all-comers policy. Fortunately now, laws in both Ohio and North Carolina protect those rights of religious student groups on campus. But that's the exception. That's just 2 states out of 50 that protect those student groups. The fourth way that the ivory tower is eroding American values is by conducting witch hunts against scholars who disagree with the campus dogma. And this is, I think, a fairly new phenomenon. In 2013, a professor at Drexel University investigated the sources of the climate of money given to research skeptical of the conventional wisdom on climate change. And the purpose of this study was clearly to intimidate and silence opinions that are outside of the campus mainstream. And then this year, I'm sure many of you saw, attacks against Dr. Willie Soon of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. I mean, his name was dragged through the mud because of corporate funding. The left's strategy here is to avoid engaging in ideas and instead engage in slander and bullying. And it is an attack on open inquiry, an attack on the thought that is allowed to come out of our campuses. And it's antithetical to the kind of open debate that has made learning vibrant for so many years. The fifth way is by disinviting or disallowing controversial speakers from campus. And it's in that same vein of policing the kind of thoughts you're allowed to have on a college campus. So we've got a couple of recent examples. Brandeis University disinvited Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a women's rights activist and native of Somalia, from speaking on campus because she's critical of Islam. Scripps College disinvited George Will from speaking on campus because he wrote a column on campus rape that the university didn't like. And here at Chapel Hill just a few years ago, I was there when students chased Tom Tancredo off stage and threw a brick through a window when he was defending Western civilization and speaking about immigrants in a way that was not popular on campus. Next, and I've lost count of my numbers because I've lettered them. So this is F. If anyone can help me out with the numbering there, I think maybe it's 6. So the next is by placing limits on students' and professors' free speech. And the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education has done some excellent work on this. But I'll give you a few examples. At Cal State Polytechnic, they banned a student from handing out flyers about animal rights because he hadn't asked for a permit first. At Marquette, a professor has been suspended because of opinions he expressed on a blog. And here in North Carolina, it took UNCW professor Mike Adams 7 years in court to win a promotion, all because UNCW didn't like what he had written on his town hall, in his town hall columns. Next, 7, is by telling students that it's okay to be intolerant of groups with opinions that conflict with the campus orthodoxy. One very recent example, Lisa Wade, a professor at Occidental College in Los Angeles, published an article in a journal stating that an understanding of economics makes you a bad person. And the way that she came to this conclusion was she used students and ran an experiment and asked them, do you want to either give money to a particular cause, turned out it was a liberal cause, or would you be willing to take part in an effort to protect students from tuition hikes? And of course, both of those things have a political component. She didn't ask them if, are you willing to give money to the cause of your choice, or are you willing to volunteer time for the charity of your choice? She picked what she believed to be good and valuable charities, but she was obviously coming at it from a particular worldview. And from that, she noticed that if you have a knowledge of economics, you are less likely to want to give money to this cause or to volunteer to lobby Congress to keep tuition low. And concluded, therefore, that people with a knowledge of economics are bad people, they're uncharitable, they're unkind, all of the other adjectives I can come up with. And she basically threw those people under the bus for having a different understanding of the world than she did. And a few months ago, not as recent as the Occidental College example, a professor at the University of Michigan took to the internet to explain why she hates Republicans and why that's okay. It's an acceptable view on campus to hate Republicans. The 8th way is by setting up kangaroo courts that give students no rights to due process. This is a clear attack on due process rights that have been in place for centuries. And I think the most clear-cut example of this is the University of Virginia rape hoax that we've just seen in Rolling Stone magazine. All the fraternities and sororities on campus were disbanded for an entire semester based on what turned out to be false allegations before any evidence had been collected, before anything had been investigated by the police or by the campus. They have replaced beyond a reasonable doubt with a preponderance of the evidence standard. So if you are accused of sexual assault on a college campus, only 50% plus one of the people deciding your fate have to believe that you were guilty. It only has to be more likely than not that you committed the act of which you are accused. This is very different from the standard used in criminal courts. And in every state except for North Carolina, college students in these kangaroo courts are not allowed to have representation, legal representation. North Carolina fixed this just last year in the General Assembly through something called the SAE Act. Students are now allowed to have legal representation at hearings on campus, but this is not the standard across the country. The bottom line is that that campuses, aided and abetted by the federal government, have established a legal code where evidence is secondary to public relations and public opinion. Am I on 9? Yeah. 9. So number 9. They erode American values by mocking personal responsibility, hard work, and achievement. And one way they do this is by allowing students to major in grievance. And I didn't come up with calling them grievance majors. Mike Munger came up with that in an excellent speech. So students can major in, essentially victimology, complaining that they're not responsible for, their own success or their own work. They say it's okay if you don't succeed, just blame the patriarchy. The second movement that has been gaining traction on campus is the check your privilege movement. And you can check your privilege online. But the entire way that you do that is by telling the online calculator, your race, your gender, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. It is entirely based on demographics. And so it is to say that, who your skin color, your gender is, that's all you are. That is what makes up whether you're going to succeed or fail and how you're going to be treated here in the United States. And that movement has been used to tell people that you can't weigh in on topics for which your gender or your skin color or your sexuality don't match the topic being discussed. And it's also been used to tell people that they probably didn't earn the successes that they've had in life. It's very destructive of trying to create a culture where students achieve. The next way that they're mocking responsibility, hard work, and achievement is actually institutionalized, and that is grade inflation. The idea that everybody gets an A, everybody gets a ribbon. And the grade inflation has been going on despite the fact that SAT scores have declined during that same period of time, and the fact that when we have measured it, which several scholars have done, we know that students are not learning a whole lot. They're not adding much in their critical thinking skills between their freshman and their senior year. So we know that these inflated grades are unearned. Last but not least, in the way that universities are mocking hard work, is affirmative action, where skin color is more important than personal accomplishments, than the achievements that people have made. What you really want to do is create the right socially engineered mix of skin colors and tones, not based on any success that people might have had prior to applying for college. And all of this sends signals to students that there is no such thing as personal responsibility. If you fail, it's someone else's fault. If you succeed, it's someone else's credit. So what incentive then is there to learn, to become a scholar, to master your discipline? Very little. And number 10, and I think this is the one that most professors are guilty of, a lot of these, the only people who are really guilty are the radicals on campus, the people who are out protesting. But this last one I think is pervasive, and that is many professors sit by and do nothing and let radicals take over their campuses. They allow people like Jan Voxel, who was up to her eyes in the athletic scandal, to run the faculty senate. And it's really letting the inmates run the asylum. The people who want to just sit down and do their work and teach their classes are ignoring what's going on their own campuses and allowing radicals to dominate the campus dialogue, to run the faculty senate, and to be the public face of the university. They're not standing up and saying, this is unacceptable. And I think that is really a bigger problem than all of the others combined. The other problems are coming from fringe elements on campus, or from an administrator who's trying to make sure he doesn't get sued. But ignoring the problem is something that is pervasive across all of campus. So I'll end with what I hope is a bright spot, and is what can you do about it? First and foremost, do not give money to your alma mater. Just stop. They're not going to do anything good with it, and even if you try to attach strings, they'll get around it. Donor intent is not respected at our colleges and universities. If you have to give it to the student group that wants to put on an event that you think is a great addition to what's going on campus. Just don't give it to the development people who call you. Second, if you see something going on campus, or if you hear about something, broadcast it to everyone you know. To parents, to trustees, to potential students, to current students, to grandparents. Let people know what's really going on campus, because I think there's still too much willingness to just let campuses kind of continue on in what they've been doing. And there's not enough awareness that it's not all just football games and parties, which I think everybody is willing to tolerate to some extent. There's a lot more going on than that. So broadcast it. And the third way, of course, is to follow the Pope Center on Facebook, like us on Twitter, read our articles, sign up for the Clarion Call. I think there's a sign-up sheet out front. And pay attention to what we're doing, because we're exposing these kind of problems every day and suggesting solutions. Thank you.
I don't disagree at all with what you said. My problem is, I sit here and think about what is the major counterforce to this. I don't see it in the administration. I don't see it of the schools. I don't see it in the administration of the country. I certainly don't see it in the press. Right? Mm-hmm. So where is the major counterforce?
Well, there are a couple counterforces. One is legislatures are finally waking up and cottoning on, and they are trying to do something about it. Here in North Carolina, they are very aware of what's happening. And there have been other bright spots around the country where either governors or legislatures have realized that what they intended to create has just snowballed out of control. Another counterforce that my colleague Jay Shallon just talked about are independent academic centers that are doing excellent works of scholarship, that are being true to the mission of open inquiry and debate. And there are a lot of those on campus. Third is that there is an immense amount of innovation in the higher education sector. And universities are going to have to fight harder than ever to retain the students and continue to attract the students that they now have. There's a growing awareness that the 4-year experience is way too expensive, and more students are choosing alternatives. They're choosing to go to community colleges or technical schools. They're choosing to do their learning online, where they don't have to worry about this, the toxic campus. They're at home concentrating on their books and their lectures, and they're not participating in, I think, something that has turned a lot of people off. And so my hope is that through innovation, through watchdogs like the Pope Center and through a couple of legislatures really getting it, we can push the change in the right direction. Yes?
Perhaps we were naive, and I think you're right, the legislature is starting to figure out who have a problem. But the Board of Governors in this state has tremendous power. And up to now, they just haven't used it, except Mr. Ross. But, for example, it was the Republican Board of Governors that lowered the standard.
Yes.
The state is being sued, the university system is being sued for its quota system.
Mm-hmm.
And the Board of Governors could fix that in one meeting. They haven't.
Right.
And several of us had to lobby very, very hard to even get two strong conservatives on the Board of Governors. And I still don't think our legislature is fully understanding the connection between who they appoint to the Board of Governors and who they appoint to the trustees, who then make the rules. It's one of the most frustrating things I've observed in the last 4 years.
I think you're right. And one of the things we've observed about who gets appointed to the board and some of the problems are that a lot of them are alumni of our North Carolina institutions. And for them, it's very, very difficult to be critical of those institutions. You know, in particular, if they've served on the board of visitors of their alma mater, and then they've gone to the games of their alma mater, and they're friends with the chancellor. It's very hard then for that person to turn around and say, hey, there are problems, we need to fix this. So I think the continued policy of appointing boosters has to end.
Well, I would just encourage using the Locke Foundation to try to educate these Board of Governors and trustees, perhaps even have seminars for them. Because I just feel your typical line of just put one and one together and get two. I see that all the time.
Oh, sorry, Don.
Sorry. You touched on a lot of areas. One thing that, not that you've glossed over, but you initiated the cherry picking type of courses that are laid out there for these kids. The concern is the parents and the kids are going through all this debt.
Right.
They're not getting an education with any meat to it.
Right.
They get out of school, and they're not going to be able to get a job the equivalent to what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was Lou Gerstmann with IBM. When he took over IBM, he said he found out kids are coming out of college, they're not ready to go to work. They're not learning what they need. So you're creating a class, a generation that will not be able to excel because they're not learning.
Right.
And they don't even know it. And that's another.
No, you're absolutely right, and I have done work on that. And I think I probably should have said at the very beginning that there are a host of problems that are kind of outside the scope of this talk in terms of how much higher education costs, whether students can get jobs, whether the education that's being given is in any way related to what is available in the market. And you're absolutely right, and it's just, I had to stop at 10. Yes?
Well, first of all, I have a child in high school, so I hope they'll have an AP grievance course. I hope that's not But I would say, could you tell us some colleges or universities that are doing it right, sticking to the word about my own alma maters?
Mm-hmm.
I think looking at their core curriculum, which I think is served students well. Who does it? Are there examples within North Carolina where
Right.
do it well?
Actually, the best core curriculum in North Carolina is in our community college system. They stick to basics. And it fits on one page. UNC Chapel Hill has 2,000 courses. Our community college system, 1 page of courses. And they are the absolute basics. English, literature, math, history. Very, very simply laid out, and it's exactly what you would want to see in a foundation. So I should give the community college system, all the credit for doing that. Across the country, there are a couple of great examples too. St. John's has it's called a Great Books program. But here in North Carolina, I'm not sure if any of our colleges have earned like an A from ACTA's on ACTA's measure. But I would encourage you to go to that website. It's called What Will They Learn, and check it out. But the community colleges are really delivering on that. Yes, Sarah.
When you talk about our colleges, are you mainly talking about the public universities, or are you talking about our smaller private universities too?
I'm talking about everywhere. These problems are especially bad in, say, the Ivies. I mean, they're the worst offenders in most of these categories. So it really is pervasive. I think, some of the small Christian colleges, no, this is not going to be the case. But it's certainly not limited to just public universities. John.
The idea while we're sitting here, one of the problems with the kind of smorgasbord of courses is that you've got 18-year-olds trying to make decisions, pick and choose. Some of them will come with a strategy, and some of them will just grab what sounds interesting or what their friends in. Are there sites, or would there be interest in work done in kind of an outside group helping? If you would like to focus on X, here are courses that you can take, to structure your child or your own experience in the college and picking among the general curriculum. Have you heard of anything along those lines?
The Pope Center has actually done that for 2 universities, UNC Chapel Hill and NC State. We've gone through with a fine-tooth comb and looked for what the problems are, what it should look like. And you're right. I mean, at every school, you can put together a great general education curriculum, because it's not like the courses don't exist. It's just no one is encouraging students to take them. And I think that you're right that someone advising students would be, an excellent service. Based on our own experience with NC State and UNC Chapel Hill, it's a huge undertaking. Yes.
I'm curious, you want to have a more basic core curriculum. I think that's great. But my sense is we've developed a faculty now who, if we're put in a position to have to teach standard Western Civ, for example, rather than their pet course on the history of feminist ideology or something, that either they couldn't do it or they wouldn't. In other words, they wouldn't teach the course that most people would want as a course in Western Civ. It would be still, gender, race, and class. So I'm wondering if we've gotten ourselves in the box, if we actually need sort of a reorientation at the graduate school level to make that much less specialized and much more of a training professors to teach our courses.
Yeah, for a long time I've kind of wondered, why do we expect people to be excellent researchers and excellent teachers and generalists and specialists at the same time? I think that the graduate school model could certainly use a lot of revision. And one thing we've written about is teaching specialists. People who make it their job to be pros at teaching the 100 level economics introductory course, making it interesting and challenging and appealing to students and putting in real world examples and keeping students engaged, and really make that their focus as a lecturer at a university. And I think that model should be used far more often, particularly for the courses that we think are so important that everyone should take them. We need to make sure that the professor at the front of the class is really a pro at that, and not a pro at researching something really esoteric.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
When you were talking about economics, and so few schools requiring economics, that seems like such a no-brainer about why that should be required. I mean, particularly for young people who want to be involved in all sorts of issues and debates and things like that. I mean, economics there's a
component, an economic component, to virtually every public policy or cultural issue or you want to discuss.
Right.
I don't understand why so few required the basics.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to who gets on those faculty committees. And, you know, it's not the person who is, you know, nose deep in his or her research, you know, teaching a very large course load. It's the people who are, you know, fired up about making sure that universities are used to change the world in probably a way that none of us here would agree with. And so the faculty committees that are in charge of making those decisions, and it is always a faculty committee, they're made up of people who think that, you know, making sure we preserve the diversity requirement and making sure that we have race, class, gender across the curriculum, that's what they're interested in, and so that's what ends up, you know, in the undergraduate bulletin. John.
Wait, I don't know if you were at UNC when this happened. You know David Garrow? You heard of David Garrow?
Mm-hmm.
If y'all, you know that David Garrow is a deep PhD, working under David Barber, got his PhD, and he won a Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote about Martin Luther King, and he was working at UNC. And he couldn't get tenure because they said, well, you're doing journalism, you're not doing political science. And the guy was brilliant. I don't know where he is now. But
I don't know.
I remember at the time, I said, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
This guy, he could not get tenure at UNC. So
Yeah.
somebody who had 2 articles in APSR could do it, but not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the requirements for tenure are so narrowly focused on a very small band of what they think, of what committees think is important, that it doesn't suit the needs of students very, very often.
Jenny, you were talking about these powerful faculty senates and these groups. Do any of them see the irony of the fact that in their desire to reject tradition, the radical groups, to reject tradition and traditional power structures, that they are themselves now a power structure that everything is built around? Do they see the irony, or do they?
I don't think so. I think that they're still, for whatever reason, kind of mired in the 60s and think that there is, you know, a man out there who is the real power structure. You know, maybe it's the Koch brothers. I'm not sure. But there's someone out there that, you know, is the real power structure, and they are still, you know, the insurgency. They're the, like I said, they think of themselves as, you know, the tiny, non-powerful counterculture movement. But in fact, you know, they do have all the power over the educations of many, many students. And I don't think they see the irony. I wish they did, but I do not think they do. Yeah.
Is there a, I just had a thought, maybe it's not doable, but is there a way that there could be like a Burkean small platoon approach to this, like where you could convince the department heads, instead of going for like the president or
Mm-hmm.
so you can convince department heads with the curriculum and then get a few that could be momentum of their departments. I don't know how that would.
No, I think that you're right. And in fact, a lot of the best kind of models are in departments. So I'll say something like, you know, only 3% of gen ed across the country requires economics. But then if you look at, for example, political science departments, almost all of them require that you take an econ course. So, you know, the students are getting more guidance within their majors than they are from the gen ed. However, you know, if you're taking a major that, you know, doesn't happen to give that guidance or is very, very narrow, like engineering, for example, there are so many engineering courses, you don't have time for electives. So it's essential that general education be really, really good. But for some of the social sciences, there is excellent guidance within those majors. And I think it's because, you know, people are very serious about their majors. And I think from there, you know, maybe we can convince them to be serious about general education as well, serious about the kind of guidance they need to give to students. And yes, I think that's a much easier tactic than going for, you know, the entire university. Yes, Jane.
Jenna, what do you think about the proposal in the legislature to require that all professors teach 4 classes a semester?
well, Jane, as you know, we don't take positions on legislation. But, you know, for years we've been saying that professors need to teach more. But I think the legislation as it stands, the model that North Carolina had been using is breaking it up in tiers according to the Carnegie classifications. So, you know, UNC Chapel Hill are in one tier, ECSU and UNC Asheville in another tier. And I think that that is a model that should be followed, making it clear that some universities' purposes are different than others. And I think the other piece that needs to be taken into account is that disciplines are different. Treating humanities the same way that you treat STEM courses doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because the way courses are taught and the ability to have you know, economies of scale, it's different. So I think I'd like to see something that's a lot more specialized. Yeah.
Could something be done at the high school level? Because it looked like the kids are coming into college and just being sponges for what they're told. But if we strengthen high school education where they have a desire to take courses that are more appropriate, they'll be able to not just rubber stamp what they're told. Could the high school be
Right. Well, I'm just gonna punt that one to Bob, who's not even paying attention over there. I wish Terry were here. I would say it's his job.
I was saying we need to give them a common core.
Yeah. So yes, I think that there is a lot that can be done in high schools, but you know, I don't want to place all of the blame on high school. I mean, we know there are problems in K-12, obviously, but I want to be able to improve higher education independent of whatever mess we've made of, everyone has made of K-12, and make sure that colleges are doing their jobs even when they're, you know, when students are not all equally ready when they come in.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, I've got to ask.
Sure.
What you said at the beginning, you were at a Republican.
Yes.
How many students?
Oh, all of the students who are part of the club did not show up, so it wasn't the entire club. It was probably about 20 people in attendance. I think that they have a membership of something more like 60 or 70. They've always had a very strong college Republicans group at UNC Chapel Hill.